rebuilding after a hurricane. And give you a little example, story, personal experience, where I went to volunteer for pro bono legal help my third year in law school, which was 2 years after Hurricane Katrina. And we went to New Orleans to do bankruptcy court work because bankruptcies were backed up like you wouldn't believe. And on the last day, and while we were there, we saw the devastation that happened. And in 2 years, a lot of work was already being done. Brad Pitt's project, which have now been proven to be more detrimental than good, were getting started at that time. And the city of New Orleans proper had recovered, more or less. The judge, the bankruptcy court judge, the federal judge who was overseeing the bankruptcies in New Orleans at the time, on our last day of volunteering, I think we volunteered for like a week, we were talking to her, and she said that, before Katrina, we would have maybe 20, 30 bankruptcies, 40 bankruptcies in federal court. And at that time, in 2007, 2008, at that time, when we were volunteering there, the bankruptcy cases there were 2,000 bankruptcy cases on the docket, 2 years after Katrina. Katrina caused billions of dollars of damage and cost over 1,800 lives. Then Sandy, which happened October of 2012, it happened in October 22nd of 2012, and I went there 2 weeks afterwards to do some volunteer work and visit my friends who, a lot of my friends from law school live in New York City. So I don't remember the devastation to be, a lot of cars were, and we went from Manhattan to the Rockaways, where most of the damage had happened, to provide aid and to distribute the resources that FEMA was providing, like toothbrushes and all of that stuff, just the necessities, bare necessities, and then make food for them and take food to the food kitchen, from the church food kitchen to the Rockaways, because there were no cafeterias, there was no restaurants, the buildings had no power. Some of the buildings, I think, were getting power back, and this was 2 weeks after Hurricane Sandy had hit New York City, and this was only in the Rockaways. And when we traveled from Manhattan to the Rockaways, I remember a lot of like ruined cars on the side of the street that had been pushed aside, and I saw a lot of like debris everywhere. And when we got to the Rockaways, the gymnasium where we were distributing all the necessities, the whole wooden floor was buckled, like this huge waves. The basketball stadium had turned into these huge waves, like wooden wave on which we were, giving out these resources. And I talked to this one lady who lived at one of the apartments in the Rockaways, and she said that when the waters came into the Rockaways from the hurricane, she was in another building, and the power had gone off, and her kids were in their other building. So in order for her to get to her kids, the water had come in so fast that by the time she had gone down to go across, the water was already at her chest, and she's probably maybe like 5'3" or something like that. And so she had to swim from her friend's building, which was the same complex, maybe like 30, 40 feet, to her building, to get to her building where her children were when the power had gone out. And that was like haunting to me. And then, when now we are left with the aftermath of Hurricane Fiona in Puerto Rico and Hurricane Ian in Southwest Florida, and the damage that they have done, and Hurricane Fiona went over Puerto Rico not many years after Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico. So, Puerto Rico is in really bad shape. And now Southwest Florida is devastated. And Hurricane Ian hit Southwest Florida at full strength. And I saw on these live feeds and live streams and these aerial footages of the area that was hit by Ian, that there are literally 50-foot yachts on top of houses and 30-foot yachts on top of cars. And like houses have been moved from one end to another. I don't recall that in Sandy. And that happened in Katrina, and I never saw the devastation of Katrina because I went there 2 years after. I imagine the Ninth Ward was devastated, and that's where most of the people died. So, but with this hurricane, with Ian, it has put yachts on top of houses. And so I'm thinking, and by the way, Hurricane Sandy cost, I think, $170 some billion and 245 lives or something like that. I am projecting, based on Katrina and a rough assessment and of Sandy, that Hurricane Ian's cost will be at least $300+ billion, simply because the visual, but just purely by visual, the damage that I have seen versus, and the stories of the people is just of a different category than I heard personally in the aftermath of Sandy, in the roughest hit area of Sandy. And we heard from people in the roughest hit areas of Ian, and it was a whole different creature. It was this 18-foot wave coming at them. And this is just from my personal observation and my personal experience, mind you. There may very well be people's experiences in Hurricane Sandy and most definitely in Hurricane Katrina where there was untold suffering and just devastation anywhere from wherever you could see. Looking at it from a macro standpoint, like literally from satellite pictures, and the devastation and the demographic, because Katrina was a poor area. So a lot more people died, over 1,800, but infrastructure damage was less, which speaks to the economic disparity that was there at the time and probably still exists to this day. In New York with Sandy, the cost of Sandy was a lot more than Katrina because the infrastructure that was hit was far more urbanized than the infrastructure that was hit with Katrina, although the levees broke in Katrina. So, but Sandy hit the biggest financial center and literally brought New York City to a halt. Times Square was absolutely empty the day that Sandy hit New York City. In Ian's case, Ian has blown away whole highways. It has blown away highways, put yachts atop of houses, displaced houses and put them in other areas, created sand dunes on top of restaurants, and just we still don't know how many people have died. The number has gone up at last count past 100. And from sight, the damage looks close to being at least $300 billion plus. the population density is not nearly as much as the Ninth Ward in New Orleans. So I don't know if the number of deaths will be that much, but because of the sheer devastation, the number of deaths depend on how many people remained on those islands that are now disconnected from the mainland, and how quickly and efficiently the rescue operations can get to others who are trapped in these places that are otherwise inaccessible.